If you believe in ghosts, or even if you don't, these stories will send chills down your spine. Story 1. My dad came back to haunt me. Maybe? My dad died around Christmas time a few years ago. I wasn't devastated to lose him as a person, as we had been estranged for about 10 years at that point, and he was abtimesive. I went into foster care and lost all contact with family for a while. As a result, I was more devastated to lose the dad I should have had, but that's another soapbox. Anyways, his death led me to be connected to a relative who, unknown to me, had been keeping my childhood dog that I had been separated from for 10 years. When I went into foster care, I lost everything, and most importantly, my sweet dog. She was a Chow retriever. That same day, I rearranged my whole life to bring her home and take care of her. She was in very rough shape. The family member kept her but didn't take care of her, and quite the opposite. They kept her outside for all those years. No vet care, had mange, a broken tail, broken teeth, severe hip dysplasia and arthritis, and had heartworms. It was sub-zero temps, and if I had not taken her home that night, she would have absolutely died. I did call animal control on my relatives, to which nothing came out of that. They have a lot of money and power. Anyways, I was able to spend an amazing 9 months with my girl until she passed from cancer. She was the most spoiled dog for those 9 months. I still live with crippling grief and shame over the horrible life she lived for most of her life. I suffered from an intense grief after her death. She died right before the following Christmas after my dad died. A few days after she died, my husband and I thought we heard her nails scratching the kitchen floor. Since she was arthritic, her nails would make a very distinct scraping sound when she got up or laid down. This happened for several nights in a row. At first, my now husband and I, were convinced it was her. But then I began to feel scared. I didn't feel like it could be her presence if it left me feeling fearful, but I wasn't sure. Keep in mind that once my dog re-entered my life, any grief or thoughts about my dad completely left my mind, and I dedicated my whole life to my dog until her death. The scratching stopped after a couple of days, but weird things started happening. I began to feel the feeling of someone always watching me. Perhaps this is due to trauma, but I have had this feeling at certain points throughout my life. I have also had periods of severe sleep paralysis and terrifying dreams throughout my life. I have always considered myself to be somewhat spiritually sensitive. It was a normal morning and I was getting ready for work. I was walking towards my kitchen and things looked pretty normal, including the huge pile of unopened mail and missive papers that we always have on the kitchen table. For some reason, I felt that weird feeling again. There was one specific piece of paper that was folded somewhat halfway and laying on one side. I fixated on that piece of paper, and the paper flipped to the other half just like if someone were to maneuver it physically. It was a very unnatural movement. Note that no windows were open, no fans were on. I was convinced that I was seeing things and just backed away slowly, getting ready for work. I headed back into the kitchen to grab my lunch from the fridge that I packed the night before. Right in front of the fridge, there it was. That very same paper that moved on its own, right in front of the fridge. I had a sense that whatever moved it was trying to get my attention. Also note, my husband was not awake at this time, no open windows, no fans. This felt somewhat malevolent. I then quickly noped TF out of the house. Nothing else physically happened, however. I still had that feeling like I was being watched and stalked. I know, it's not some big scary thing that you read about in other stories, but it was very frightening to me. The next few days, I kept trying to think about possible explanations or sources for the paranormal activity in the home, which was never present before. Then it hit me. My dad's death anniversary had passed, and I didn't think about him for a second. He wrote me this letter, which I kept up until now, after I entered foster care, stating, "I won't die until we make amends." Well, he definitely did die, and we definitely did not make amends. It clicked in my mind that this could be my dad, angry that I did not grieve his passing. He was very narcissistic in his living years, so this is on character for him to act this way in the afterlife. I shredded the letter. It felt cathartic. Then I stood in my kitchen and audibly told him that he was not welcome in my home and to leave me alone. I never experienced anything that I felt was my dad afterwards. I feel free from him now. I do still experience other things like mimics, seeing things out of the corner of my eye, hearing things, etc. As a note, I am a therapist and know that my experiences could be a result of undiagnosed mental illness, but I have not recognized other signs or symptoms that would justify a diagnosis. If you have made it this far, I definitely would not have. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's not an exciting one, but it's one that matters to me. To this day, I feel my sweet departed dog protecting and comforting me from time to time. When I'm lonely, scared, or when I cry thinking of and missing her. Story 2. Unexplainable scream during my night shift. So, this happened about 7 years ago, but I still think about it every so often. Back then I worked as a security guard. The type of security guard that travels around in the city to do these routine checks on objects. Making sure that doors, windows, gates, etc. are locked properly, that no people are on the property, check for fire hazards, attend SOS/robbery alarms, and so on. There is this mall in the city, and per our contract we did 2 security walks in the mall. The first one when the mall closed, where we basically emptied the mall for customers, locked doors/entrances, checking all the alarm systems. We end the first round by making sure the mall is empty of both customers and employees, check surveillance, and turning on all the alarms. The second walkthrough usually took place many hours after in the middle of the night, where we made sure all the entrances is indeed locked, but also took another sweep inside to check for people, and so on. This particular evening, the first security walkthrough went by without any issues, just the usual few customers taking forever to get out. The second walkthrough, however, something really weird happened. I started off by walking around the mall, making sure nothing is out of the ordinary and that everything is locked. I step inside and check the alarm monitoring, where everything is turned on, no error codes or logs of people being inside after I left the mall my first time for the shift. I go to the top floor and work myself down each floor. Everything is looking good. Eventually, I end up in the cellar floor, which consists of this toy store on one side, and opposite to the store is this huge playroom. Both the playroom and toy store have this see-through glass wall separating them from the hallway in the middle. Anyways, I got down there and did my usual walkthrough of the cellar. The toy store had this sticker on the door saying something about collectibles 50% off or something. I walk up to the glass door and shine my flashlight towards the collectibles section. As I'm focusing on the collectibles, I hear this sudden loud scream behind me, and I mean really loud, like I wanted to cover my ears. The scream sounded like a little girl, and it screamed, "Mommy!" but with a sort of rasp and desperate tone to it, like a death scream, if that's a way to describe it. I quickly turn around, freeze in place, while shining my mag light in the hallway and in to the playroom. I just stand there for a solid 10 to 15 seconds, trying to see who screamed. After collecting myself, I immediately think that somehow a little girl must have been left in the playroom when the mall closed. So I run into the playroom and start looking through all the toys and plushies, but no girl was found. I then double-check every little surface in the cellar, but no one was there. I began to think that my colleague, who ended his shift many hours ago, is playing a prank on me, so I go back upstairs to the alarm/surveillance monitoring, but again there's no logs of anyone but me entering different zones/using the key card. I then check the surveillance, but here's no one but me and on all the cameras. I also started to chuckle at myself as I thought I looked like a coward when it happened. I settled my mind to it being some sort of doll in the toy store with a broken voice box or something, but weird that the scream came from behind me from the hall/playroom. I leave. I visit the store the next day and ask about the doll that screams, but they don't have any dolls with any kind of voice box. They also tidy up and clean the playroom every morning, and if they find toys left behind that they themselves do not own, they make a list and put it in a storage box. No dolls whatsoever. I also ask if they have baby monitors for sale, but they did not. I'm very skeptical by nature and absolutely do not believe in ghosts and will always find a natural/logical non-supernatural explanation when stuff like that happens, but what happened during that night shift, I just can't explain. Sorry for the long read, but I'm very interested in what y'all think it could have been. Have any reasonable explanation for what happened? Story 3. I think my workplace is haunted. Do I believe in ghosts? Not really. I'm a pretty hard atheist, but this is pretty difficult to logically explain. I started a job in a hotel as a bartender about 5 months ago. This hotel was one of the first buildings in the suburb. I'm talking over 100 years old. Almost every shift, I see shadows moving out of the corner of my eyes, specifically in the same areas, but no one is there. I sense a customer might be walking past me, but I'll look around and nobody is there. I hear my name being called so clearly, multiple times throughout the shift, but nobody is there. The weird thing is, my mother used to work here in room service many years ago and told me it was haunted and that she saw a ghost. Like I said, this place is over 100 years old. There has been many hundreds of thousands of people and their energy in here. I work as a bartender at another place as well, more modern. I do not see shadows or hear my name being called, neither anywhere else, so I don't think it's a psychological problem or phenomenon. I also don't believe these spirits have negative intentions. They've never intimidated me or made me feel uncomfortable or interfered with my work, but these strange occurrences happen every shift. I'm convinced my workplace is haunted. Story 4. The Lady of Firenze. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe with another couple. One of the towns we stayed in for a couple of days was Firenze, Florence. The fair city of Firenze is a subject for multiple books, with its art, architecture, beauty, and history, so I will not get into that here. If you are fortunate enough to have been there, you will know what I am talking about. You would also know that you cannot take a step in the city without being a stone's throw away from something historic, and all that history is bound to have its fair share of paranormal history attached. On our first night in the historic part of town, we stayed in one of the few modern hotels. This place had been completely built as a new structure, so there was nothing historic about it, but it did have a striking view of the Duomo. We could only stay there one night due to room availability, but the staff was kind enough to book us a room in a hotel that was a few streets away. We walked over to the place, and it was this charming chateau-looking building. I don't know what else to call its design, and it looked very, very old. We could not check in yet, but we asked the front desk to store our luggage so we could go sightseeing. While my friend was taking care of that, I walked around the lobby, which had an interesting display of art, items, and pictures from the hotel's history. A quick browse of display, and I quickly found out that the hotel had a rich history indeed. It had been the residence of a very wealthy family, then it had been a convent, a hospital, an insane asylum, a hospital again, and now a hotel. I have seen enough horror films to know that this is the premise where you know bad stuff is going to happen, and you tell the characters to turn around and leave. However, I shrugged it off and decided not to tell my wife, who freaks out about things like that. We had a wonderful day and evening. We retired to our room, which was nice, by the way, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up around dawn, since I am a light sleeper and an early riser, and I could tell it was dawn because sunlight was trickling in from the edges of the window curtains. The room's window was at the very center of the wall, and from its left edge, there were around 5 feet of wall until the wall met the corner where a floor-to-ceiling dresser stood. My wife normally sleeps later than I do, so when I wake up, I normally stay in bed for a while thinking about the upcoming day, and anything and everything, and that is when I saw her. At the corner of the wall between the window and the dresser, about a foot off the ground, there was a lady, dressed in all white, floating in the air. She was not translucent, but she was not completely solid either. It is hard to describe her appearance. However, I could see her facial features. I could tell she had light hair and very fair skin. Her expression was truly kind and calming, with a warm, tender smile. There was no exchange of words, no movement or gestures, no telepathic messages. We just remained there for a while just staring at each other. It is important to mention that at no point I felt threatened or scared. Freaked out, definitely. My wife began stirring in bed next to me and eventually put her arm across my chest and began making light, half-asleep conversation. I did not break eye contact with the entity at all and began smiling back at her. Just one of those comfortable, sincere smiles. As my wife became more active, I said to her, "Don't look, but there is a woman in our room. She is floating. I think she is a ghost." My wife opened her eyes wide, all the mind fogginess running from her head. She stared at me for a few seconds, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I could tell that she shut her eyes hard, in an "I don't want to look" way. A few moments after that, the lady moved backwards and faded into the wall. She did not say goodbye or changed her expression. She just left. I told my wife she could look now, but she did not want to. I could tell she was praying. We went down for breakfast and told our friends the story, which they of course did not believe. I went to the front desk and told the person there what I had seen, and she asked me if I wanted to fill out a form about what I had seen. Apparently, it was not uncommon, but the experiences and the guests' reactions were very wide-ranging, and they had figured over the years that most guests just wanted someone to listen to them, so they instituted the form so people would not talk about the encounters around other guests and just write them down. I chose not to write anything. To this day, I clearly remember the fondness of the smile of the Lady of Firenze. I would like to thank her for reaching out to me and being so kind. Story 5. Recently, I posted about seeing an apparition a day ago. Here is a part 2 to this. Recently, I posted about seeing an apparition a day ago when I was in the kitchen outside. 3 of my neighbors have passed away due to natural causes in a short space of each other, and now I'm experiencing things otherworldly. Here is a part 2 to this. I was weightlifting in my room and voice noting my friend on Snapchat. Abruptly, I was interrupted by the sound of heavy footstep on our drive. which has stones on it. Historical Holig nurses and carers used to come and attend my aisle neighbor on the back, but which have since passed away. I was quite alarmed, and I assumed it was an intruder trying to get into the house, and then all of a sudden the door handle was going like crazy, as if someone was trying to get in. I assumed it was my brother, but when you check it out anyhow, it was not him. He was on his games and talking to his friends. I told him we may have a burglar outside, so he went out to check it out, but no one was there. I only assumed it was something otherworldly. Maybe after all my neighbor was saying hello, but who knows? I try to be a rational person when confronted with the inexplicable. Story 6. Possible demon. I'm 20 years old now, and I experienced a possible demon when I was growing up in my old house. For some context, witchcraft is very common in my culture, and I do believe that was also a cause, because my grandpa had a mistress in El Salvador who wanted us out of the picture, and she regularly practiced witchcraft. My mom is my grandpa's favorite child, and throughout my childhood she had many near-death experiences, and it would make sense, since if my grandpa dies, his money goes to my mom first. The first time I noticed something was off was when I was around 6 years old. My family had just picked my mom up from dialysis, and we were all sitting in the kitchen eating, and all of a sudden I hear a whoosh sound from behind me. We all turned around because we heard it, and it was weird. The second instance was when I would see shadow figures in my room and at my door. I was never allowed to close my door, and when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I usually saw a shadow standing in the hallway, and sometimes in my closet, since I always kept that door open. Sometimes I would see the figure sitting in the chair I had in my room. We would just stare at each other. I believe it's the top hat man because I always saw the hat. The third instance was when we had a family living with us in our basement. For context, corporal punishment is very common in Latino/Hispanic families, and we would often hear the mom discipline her son and hear his screams. We would check on him all the time because sometimes it sounded like he was being murdered. One night my mom, grandma, and I came home from church at around 11 p.m. since Saturday service was at night and was 3 hours. We were talking in the kitchen when all of a sudden we hear the loudest scream, and it sounded like the boy, but this time it sounded like he was being stabbed to death. We immediately ran downstairs, but to our surprise nobody was there. Checked all the rooms and the family wasn't there. The fourth instance was when I was still little, and I couldn't stop crying. I don't remember much of it, but the pastor at my church came with his wife to pray over me. We went to a room downstairs and the door was left open. He put oil on my forehead and began praying. I never closed my eyes for prayer, so I just stared outside the door, and that's when I saw a black shadow figure walk by the door and look inside before disappearing. The fifth instance was when I was around 11 years old, and I began feeling like someone was watching me all the time. I felt intense fear and hated being home. I felt anxious and paranoid every time I was home, which is something that had never happened. The sixth instance was the scariest because it was physical. I came home exhausted from a soccer tournament and did my night routine and fell asleep on my back. For context, my bed had plastic on the mattress since little kids often slept on my bed when family would come over and spend the night. During the night I woke up because something was pulling on my left arm and leg trying to pull me off of my bed. I could hear the plastic moving and felt someone breathing on me. I heard a bunch of whispers but I couldn't understand them. Then I heard a woman begin to laugh in my ear. I couldn't move, and something was on top of me, and I felt a strong urge to open my eyes but I didn't. I began praying, and then it went away quickly. I didn't open my eyes for the rest of the night, and the next morning I told my aunt about it because it terrified me. She told me something similar had happened to her, but she was laying on her stomach. She said she woke up and felt something sitting on her back and heard the woman laughing. Then she said, "Who is your God?" So she started praying, and it all went away instantly. I have other stories from my grandma on my dad's side, so if this is interesting, I will post her stories. Story 7. The Shed. This probably happened a good 8 or 9 years ago, but maybe longer, I'm not sure. My grandmother lived about an hour and a half away from us. It was a small seaside town in the South Island of New Zealand. For a lot of my childhood, we'd go on holidays every weekend and take the drive to go and see her. Her property had 3 sections on it. The main house where she lived, a smaller cottage on one diagonally to her main house. The cottage was a former railway cottage, old, and another section connecting the two. This was a mostly empty section, mostly used for storing firewood and having rubbish burn-offs. She never really did anything much with it. However, on the corner of the property there was this shed. It was a good size, probably around the length of 2 decent-sized SUVs and the width of 2 as well. It was shaped like a rectangle and built with wood. The town was old, and the shed was built well before my grandmother had ever moved into where she lived. though she had also been coming to the town for years. It was run down. The boards were weathered and creaky. There was this lock on the door. It was always a place that us kids weren't allowed to go inside of. Not for any supernatural reason, as none of us believe in that kind of thing. The place was just old, it was shabby, run down, and slowly crumbling as all things do with time. One day I got curious. The lock was already rusted and I knew I could loosen it. It was only me and my grandmother there, as my parents had left me to stay with her for a while, so there wasn't mom or dad to watch over me. I opened the door, which was extremely stiff, and walked in. It was cold and there was next to no light. I looked around for a bit, across the dusty workbench, and I turned around. I felt this really strong pressure on me, and I felt like I heard this voice. The voice was powerful but garbled, like it had trouble speaking. It said either of these two things: get out or get help. I couldn't make out the second word specifically, but the sound and tone of it was clear as day. I know it sounds like fiction, but it happened. It was like there was someone else in there, but I knew for a fact that I was the only one around. It was an old man's voice. It was really rough, but powerful. I felt so scared and panicked. I looked around and I couldn't see anyone. There wasn't anyone else there. It was just me. I ran out the shed, closed the door, and that was that. A year or 3 later, my grandmother sold the section. The shed was knocked down, and a massive house was built, and that was that. I think about my experience a lot. I'm still extremely skeptic about most ghost stories and encounters. I really don't believe in that stuff, but I really can't explain it. I'm at a loss. The closest thing I can explain it away as being was some kind of hallucination. I was a very young teenager. I know our eyes see what we want them to see in the dark. The voice was like a foghorn. It terrified me. I still think somewhere there could be a logical explanation for it, and most likely there probably is, but for right now, it's the closest thing I can point to say that ghosts might actually exist. Story 8. Time to go. So my background is in construction. I have been working construction since I was around 20 years old as an electrician. One of the things I love about my career is I get to see many different things. I'm not stuck in one spot, as we have multiple different projects going on for the year. Well, I was a third-year apprentice. We were working at a university that just so happened to be a California mental institution before that. That start time for the project was graveyard shifts. We would start around 10:30 p.m. at night and be done around 6 a.m. in the morning. There were all kinds of creepy things happening at the job, but here is my experience. My supervisor sends me to go work in this electrical room by myself. As we walked through the inside of this building through corridors and rooms to get there, I noticed I would be isolated from everyone else. Whatever, no big deal. Sets me up with my task and tells me he'll be back. Now this place is huge and has an underground tunnel system that is used for heating the many buildings throughout the entire campus. However, where I'm at, I'm all alone. So I'm finishing up and setting the last screw to this device, and I hear pounding coming from beneath the floor, like 3 heavy knocks. I stop and listen. The knocking gets louder. Then all the lights turn off. The knocking gets even louder. I turn my headlamp on. My light is flashed on the wall and floor where the knocking is coming from. All of a sudden, the electrical door burst open. I jump and look to see who it is. My supervisor tells me, let's get out of here. He forgot to mention all the lights are on a timer, and once 12:30 p.m. they don't come back on until later that morning. I grab my tools and we get the hell out of there. I ask him about the loud knocking, but he didn't hear anything. To this day, I still don't know what that was. Story 9. Did a ghost talk to me? I went to bed at around 12 o'clock in an attempt to drift to sleep. As I closed my eyes for around 5 minutes, I hear a voice whisper the name Taryn, my sister's name, right behind me. Even more strange was how this voice sounded like my other sister's voice behind me. I immediately shot up from my bed and turned on a little green lamp, the kind people have in college, and looked around left and right but didn't see anything. There was no way I could go back to bed right after that, so I watched YouTube shorts until 12:20, where I decided to attempt to fall asleep again. I did eventually go to bed, but now without hearing movement and eyes staring daggers towards me. I don't know why this happened to me, but it is a fact. My house is haunted from other paranormal experiences I've had and other family members had as well. Story 10. Visited by a shadow person shortly before mother passed. I have shared this story with a few others, but this is the first time I've ever written about this particular experience. In June 2016, my mother died of cancer. 5 of my 6 siblings and I were fortunate enough to make the trip to the small town of Harper, Texas, to be with her in her final days. If you've ever been to Harper, or have even driven through, you know there's not much to it. With a population just shy of 1,100 people, 1 restaurant, and 1 stoplight, it could be more accurately described as a rest stop along US Highway 290. To keep my sanity during the trip, rather than stay in my mother's tiny and now very overcrowded house, I opted to stay at a hotel in nearby Fredericksburg, about 25 miles away. For the next 2 weeks, I made the drive daily to spend time with my family, making the most of the time we had left with our mother. One by one, my siblings and I eventually had to return to our normal lives, although one brother and one sister would stay with our mother until she passed. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, leaving my mother and knowing full well that I would not see her again in this plane of existence. I had a very early morning check-in time for my car rental and flight back to California. Since I would need to get up at 3 a.m. to drive the 85 miles to San Antonio, I felt it prudent to get back to my hotel in Fredericksburg and try to sleep before leaving. Sleep did not come easily. Although I was tired and emotionally drained, it was still very early in the evening. After what seemed like an eternity of tossing and turning, I finally managed to doze off and slept for a few hours until it happened. I awoke suddenly and opened my eyes wide, feeling an unmistakable presence with me in the room, like someone standing at the foot of my bed and watching me. I slowly peeled back the comforter from my head and mustered whatever courage I had in me at the moment, and looked. At the foot of the bed, I saw a dark silhouette appearing to just stand there. Considering my emotional state at that moment, I quite literally said out loud, "Oh fuck no," and pulled the comforter back over my head, knowing the next time I looked, whatever it was I thought I saw standing there would be gone. What happened next was one of those moments that stay with you for life. As I lay there with my head covered, I held my breath momentarily and just listened. Seconds later, I felt someone sitting down on the foot of the bed. The bed shifted slightly, and the weight of the comforter on my legs got significantly heavier. I remember bolting upright at that moment, throwing the covers off me and saying, nope, no fucking way. I got out of bed and now paced the floor, trying to both calm and reassure myself that I was the only one in the room. I looked at the clock and saw that it was just after midnight, and then made the obvious choice that I would stay awake for the next few hours before checking out of the hotel and driving to the airport. I opened the mini fridge and found an energy drink, turned the TV on, and called my wife to tell her about what I had just experienced. By 3 a.m., I was at the hotel front desk to check out and settle my bill. The night auditor was a very nice young lady who greeted me with a smile, commented on my very early departure, and asked if I had gotten enough sleep. I shook my head and proceeded to tell her what had happened to me in my room earlier that night. Still a little freaked out, her expression now more serious, the auditor leaned forward and said in a lowered tone that she just knew that the hotel was haunted. In the dead of night, she would hear children running up and down the hall, look but see no one there. Chairs would slide across the floor in the nearby dining room, making an unmistakable sound she said she heard quite often. I paid my bill, thanked her for sharing her experiences in the haunted hotel, and was soon on the highway driving to the airport, homeward bound. I have experienced many paranormal occurrences at my own home, but never while traveling. Story 11. Something spoke to me. I believe it might be a threat. Okay. I have had an interesting amount of paranormal experiences, and this scared me more than others. I had forgotten about it until recently. This has happened twice. The first time was years ago when I was in middle school. The second only a few months ago. During summer break of 8th grade, one couldn't sleep at night. I always had to wait until morning, but one time I thought I should sleep earlier, so I turned off the lights and my PlayStation, then got into bed. After a few seconds, a female voice whispered sharply in my ear, "Wake up." I instantly got up, turned everything on, and waited until morning to sleep. This second one happened recently. It was way more intense than the one before. I was in bed going to sleep at around 11 p.m. when parts of my body started to go numb, like something was trying to make me sleep. I fought the urge to sleep, and I started hearing some kind of music like this, super almost royal music. And I heard a female voice that said, "You never had the chance to get away from me." Now, if anyone knows about what might be happening, I would especially appreciate any tips. Side note, I do not fear these entities anymore, for I am stronger and capable of many things. I just need help figuring out what it is. Story 12. Paranormal activity. Hey guys, some weird things have been happening to my sister. I need help and suggestions on who to talk to about this. I have never used Reddit before, so I'm not too sure how this works. Disclaimer. This might sound very fake, I know. When she told me all this, I was skeptical, until my dad backed up the story and told me how he found the room a mess and heard the screaming coming from her room. Mind you, my dad is not the type of person to even believe in this type of stuff, so for him to be shaken up by this is crazy to me. Background info. I, 16, recently moved out of my dad's house into my boyfriend's house, and my sister, 14, moved into my dad's house from our mom's house. We have never lost someone close to us, so this is not a friendly spirit. From someone we have lost. My sister has been feeling uneasy recently. She has been feeling like someone is always following her, so we did some research and found out that getting a cat can scare away spirits. So we got 2 kittens. What happened? Last night, Around 3 in the morning, she was in her room with the two cats, and she started to hear tapping behind her wardrobe. She didn't think much of it until it started getting louder. She threw a pencil and chapstick behind the wardrobe, thinking whatever is tapping would stop. A few minutes later, the pencil and the chapstick came flying back at her. Her being very scared started praying to God to protect her from the spirit that was there when the sound of angry growling came from behind the wardrobe. The kittens were beside her, so she knew they weren't making the growling sound, and they are kittens, they can't make sounds like that. After sitting in shock, not knowing what just happened, our dog bowl that was sitting beside the wardrobe came flying at my sister. Then the container of dog food that was beside the bowl. She started screaming, "Stop! Leave me alone!" Since she knows she's not supposed to be scared of the spirits. She continued screaming when the wardrobe started to move away from the wall. She then started to scream louder, and the wardrobe started shaking. She screamed more. Then the doors of the wardrobe started shaking and the wardrobe moved more away from the wall. She ran out of her room and got my dad. He came in her room to inspect it, and there was nothing there. He cleaned up the mess that the spirit made and let my sister sleep in his room. What happened here? It wasn't a dream because my dad had to clean the mess up. Is it a spirit? What do we do about this? HELP. Please give me an explanation to what happened or someone I can talk to about this. I also have more stories my sister would like me to share leading up to this. If anyone has a clue of what's going on, please help. We have no idea what's happening. Help. If you know of anyone that can help, please share contact info. Or if you know of anyone that has been through something like this, please share my sister's story to them. Story 13. Ghost encounter? Somebody please explain this to me. Okay, so here's what happened to me. Around 11:40 p.m., I was driving myself to work, and I always take the same freeway there. I always listen to the radio. I have it on 98.7 FM. Suddenly, on the exit before my usual exit from the freeway, the radio station switched not once but twice and landed on 96.3 FM. I also have a rosary that's hanging on my rearview mirror. I am on the freeway, so my rosary always swings backwards or forwards or side to side. However, when the radio station switched, my rosary was still. I remember staring at it, and my intuition told me not to touch it. Mind you, I am going 65 miles per hour to 70 miles per hour on the freeway. This experience lasted perhaps less than a minute. Creepy, right? Now, what's creepier is, before I got up to leave to work, I was taking a nap. I had a dream where Jewish people were in line to what appeared to be a food truck. I was in the front of the line. The person at the counter was a priest, and in front of me he placed 2 bowls of holy water. He spoke a language to me I did not understand. Then he dipped his finger in the holy water and drew a cross symbol on my forehead. Then I dipped my finger and thumb in the holy water and made the cross symbol on myself. I was getting yelled at by everyone BC. They asked me to do it TWICE. I woke up shortly after. IDK if there's any significance there, but it was weird. Then the whole experience driving to work happened. Religious background. I am Catholic, but I have not been to church in years. I don't know many prayers, but I do believe in God. Story 14. A haunted theater? I posted this story on my main account but decided to repost it to an alt account. I was in the theater alone one night. I'm in high school theater, so while I'm not technically meant to be alone, my directors couldn't care less. The 2 other people I was with were in another part of the theater, down a long hall and in a room that didn't let much sound in nor out if its big metal doors were shut, which they were. I was on stage packing up. It was dark, the stage lights and house lights were off, and I hadn't bothered with the work lights as I'd only be a minute, so it was pitch black aside from the flashlight on my phone. I was gathering my things when I heard footsteps. I assumed it was one of my friends and shot my flashlight over there to discover no one. As odd as it was, I chalked it up to them walking outside the doors or the wood settling. It was rather old wood. I continued to gather my things when I heard rattling from the catwalk above me. I pointed my light up and, once more, nothing. I silently cursed the rats and the horror videos I watched for scaring me. Finished packing my things and turning to leave, when I shone my flashlight to the main doors and saw something. It was just a moment that I saw it, but I still remember it clearly. A tall, dark figure hunched over. No disturbance features. I walked to the door, a bit unnerved. When I went to open the door, the shop's automatic lights flickered on, their motion censored, and you have to walk pretty far into the workshop for them to turn on, so there was no way I triggered it. I didn't stick around long enough to find out who that had been turned on. It could have possibly been a custodian, though why they would go into a room they never cleaned nor have a reason to be in is beyond me. I rushed out the hall and into the room where my friends were, the black box. I said a quick goodbye before exiting the theater entirely. The motion sensor lights in the hall never turned on, but I didn't realize till later. I'm not 100% sure if this is paranormal or not, or just a series of oddly timed coincidences. Story 15. Hi, Dad. Following events happened in the early morning hours of what would have been my father's 80th birthday had he not passed away 2 years prior. This is a bit embarrassing. I woke up that morning around 4 a.m. and had to pee. I made my way to the bathroom. After laying my cell phone by the sink, I went to pee. In a Google Assistant voice, my phone uttered something like, "Your father's name," if not specifically those words. This kind of startled me because it's my dad's birthday, and I heard my phone say this. But what followed really shocked me. My phone launched into Sinead O'Connor's version of Nirvana's All Apologies. Facts. My relationship with my father did not end well. Growing up, my father would playfully tease me about how much I loved Miss Sinead O'Connor. My phone was not within reach when this occurred. The Google Assistant is not something I use. The sensation of my dad reaching out to me in an attempt to make amends overwhelmed me. I am unsure of the cause of this happening. Has anyone else had a similar experience? Clarification. The phone didn't say my dad's name, it said, "Your dad's name." Story 16. Computer turned on. In 2019, my daughter's father-in-law passed away due to a terrible battle with cancer. He was a witty man with a great, dry sense of humor. Before he passed, his son had built my husband and I a desktop computer, and it sat in the office adjacent to our bedroom. I was awoken to the bright screen of the monitor and the startup sound that the computer makes when it turns on. I glanced at my phone, and it was 3 a.m. I got up and walked over to the computer and shut it down, thinking how strange it was and how this could possibly happen without physically pushing in and holding the button to start it up. Baffled, I returned to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, we get a phone call from my daughter with the sad news of her father-in-law's passing. Without mentioning the computer turning on, she told me his time of death was 3 a.m. I stood in disbelief, face with open eyes and hand over mouth, and told her what had happened. Apparently, just before he died, his wife asked him to give her a sign that he was okay. When he crossed over, joking, he responded with, "Sure, no problems. I'll send you a text to MSG." His dry, witty sense of humor to the end. But guess what? Her phone pinged, and she received a blank text MSG that was delivered from his phone. This happened just after he passed around the same time our computer turned on. Coincidence? Or was it our beloved friend sending us a message that he was home and okay? Red Heart. Story 17. Not a believer. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I watched Smile 2. A great movie, by the way. I've always been gullible to horror movies, and my nerves have always been jumpy. I'm spooked easily, but the feeling never lasts long. Needlessly to say, Smile 2 scared the crap out of me. After a week, I was able to re-watch it without a single scare. After the second watch, without my wife and I were laying down getting ready for bed when she asked if I believe in the paranormal. I don't. I do like the concept though. I gave her my answer and she asked if I ever had a weird experience. I have. Only 2 though. My first came while I was attending Job Corps, a trade school. For about a year, I had no roommate. I slept fine, never been disturbed. One day, my and a buddy get the option to have him move in. Bacon, what I'm calling my buddy, was a chill guy. He loved horror. He knew I spooked easily, so he never troubled me with any of his stories. One morning, I noticed he looks as if he hasn't slept. I asked, and Bacon said that it was the heat. It made sense at the time. It was summer, and ACs were out due to overuse. About 2 days later, I had this chilling dream. You can kind of compare it to sleep paralysis. ACs. I never dream, especially night terrors. I had one as a kid, but I knew it was a dream. This felt so incredibly different. I didn't have a lock for my closet. Basically a smaller room with a bunch of hangers, a door, and a hatch that needs to be locked with a combination lock. For the longest, and used a pencil to slide through the holes. Never had a problem. By the way, my room specifically had 3 closets, one for me, one for him, and one huge one in the middle. Both his and the middle were locked, though the middle didn't have a lock, and I assumed it had been glued shut or something. In the dream, I was laying on my back with only my head out of the covers. I never sleep like this. I sleep on my stomach with my arms tucked underneath me and the pillow on my head. All 3 closets were wide open. It felt as if something was watching me. I thought this was real life. I go to move, but as I move, my body gradually becomes heavy and has the feeling like when your arm falls asleep. I give up, but it's like the closets were just glaring at me. I felt this horrifying chill, I still do when I think about it, that just made me want to get out of the room. I push through the heaviness and the dead arm feeling, but as I touch the handle, my body gets so unbearably heavy, and the ringing in my ears goes haywire. I get the door opened. It's a pull, not a push, LOL, and collapse into the hallway. I wake up. Same position as the dream, on my back, arms at my side. I'm sweating a bit, but maybe it's the heat. I convinced myself it was a nightmare. I sit up, and my heart drops so low I almost cried right there. Only my closet door was wide open, pencil snapped into two on the ground near my bed. I closed it, put a pencil in, got ready for my trade, and left. I asked my roomie if he opened my closet door this morning, and he said it was closed with a pencil this morning. Now, another time was actually recently, about 2 months ago, before the first watch of Smile 2 maybe. My wife and I were having intimacy when I felt the urge to look over my shoulder. I've been in the military for a while, so I always had the urge to look behind me. My wife and I don't have a door for our room, it's just 2 curtains. We also own a duplex, and currently renting out the other room to this little, short, Mexican lady. We also have the only washer and dryer in our room, important later, but we have a door that's unbearably loud when it's opened or closed, that separates us from the rest of the house and the spare room. Shaped object poking through. My first thought was the Mexican lady, but she's like 4 inches 5 feet. This head was damn near touching the roof, 8 feet total from the floor to the ceiling. I double take and watch as the shape quickly retreats. I grab my flashlight off the side of my bed and dash into the little hallway before the loud door. Nothing. I am scared shitless. I might be overreacting, but I'm not too sure. I rarely see things like this, and I have no reason to be spooked prior to seeing it either. I'll also add that we just had a baby 2 months before this incident. I haven't told my wife and lied, saying I think the lady wanted to wash clothes and peeked in and saw us. I don't ever plan on telling her, and I'm also moving us out and just gonna rent both rooms from now on. Even though I'm still getting chills from those experiences, I still don't believe in the paranormal. Maybe I'm just a wimp with a lot of trauma. Story 18. Do I have a ghost? Okay, so I have lived in my house for years. In the time I have lived here, multiple things have happened. For instance, my room has a bathroom attached to it. I'll be laying in my bed, and my bathroom door will slam and the lights will flicker. Or, I was having a sleepover in my room with my best friend, and all of a sudden heavy footsteps were going all throughout the house that night. Doors were slamming, and the lights were flickering. The worst part is that we were home alone. We got so freaked out that we called the cops because we genuinely thought there was a person in my house. The cops got there and searched my entire house and found nothing and no evidence of anyone breaking in. I am constantly hearing whispers all throughout my house, saying my name, super quietly. My water will turn on randomly throughout the night. I'll wake up, and paper will be scattered all throughout my room. Those are just some examples of the shit that happens in my house. I genuinely don't know what to do anymore. No one believes me. I need advice. Story 19. I found my friend's ashes amongst the abandoned items in his home. I had a friend some years ago, and he and I would spend a fair share of our free time just bullshitting around his kitchen table or mine. This friend of mine was morbidly obese, but got around good considering his physical limitations. However, he passed away several years ago now, at the age of 54. This was a good 14 years longer than he was expected to live in his condition, but still his death was unexpected and sudden. We talked about many things, but one thing I remembered well was his desire to have his body's ash poured into the Gulf of Mexico. After he passed, his son hired me to clean and repair the house so it could be sold. My friend often said the home he lived in was a curse and a sort of self-imposed prison. Having bought my first home at 20, I understood exactly what he meant by this. Long story short, after me and a small crew removed all the items left behind in the house, we arrived at a point where all that was left in our way was a few odds and ends that family members had interest in, but not enough interest to pick the items up so we could paint and spackle the room. The last items in the house was what I had thought was a thick book, maybe a Bible. This item sat by itself on a fireplace mantle, and for some reason didn't get collected and disposed of when we did the trash out. So one evening I found myself working alone, cleaning floors in the rooms we had finished. At some point I walked to the fireplace to inspect this book, and much to my horror, I find it's not a book, but the receptacle containing the ashes of my friend. There, left in his prison, not even amongst the items to be picked up. An afterthought. Everything that remained of my friend on this earth was sitting alone on a mantle. No one cared enough to take them out of there, or even to have the ashes placed in a nice urn, just left gathering dust on the mantle. I believe in paranormal experiences. I have personally bore witness to unexplained occurrences, but I have never been frightened by the thought of such things. And this house, I had spent many happy hours there with my friend, and was comfortable there. But at that moment, as I stood there in disbelief at what I had found, my friend screamed at me so loud I felt it reverberate throughout my body. The hell out of me, and I ran. I ran so fast I didn't lock the house back up or turn off the lights. I just got the hell out of there. But once in my ragged out junky car, I realized what had to be done. I would have to make the 12-plus hour trip to the Gulf Coast to give my pal's remains to the ocean. since he had told me this wish many times. I didn't think my vehicle would make the trip, and this was the middle of the pandemic and the most financially difficult time of my life. But I had to do it. The worst part was walking back in that house, which now for the first time felt cold and unwelcoming. We had ourselves an adventure, I can tell you. Me and my buddy headed to the beach for the last time together. The ride home seemed lonesome without his remains, which looking back is strange in itself. Going down felt oddly like an adventure. Not knowing if my old truck was going to give up, and having to pinch every dime I had. The way back felt sad, like I had been left behind in a kind of living hell, and the uncertainty that had been exciting before now filled me with dread and fear. It took several years to shake that feeling, and now it's coming back. Story 20. Black dog walking sideways. I don't know if this goes here, but I've been thinking about this since I was 14. I was either 13 or 14, and I was friends with some people who were at least 4 years older than me. We used to drive around at night to spooky places for fun. One night we went to a cemetery that is notorious for being haunted. It was fine, nothing significant occurred. As we left, we drove down a dirt road for a while until we turned onto the main road, and once we turned onto the main road, a tiny little black chihuahua was in the middle of the street. We stopped and waited for it to cross, but it was alarming because the dog was face first at our headlights, with the eyes shining and all, and stayed that way while it walked, both right feet at a time and then left feet at a time, like a crab walk across the road. It was weird, and we all knew it was weird, but life goes on. Years later, I'm 19, and I'm at a party at a friend's house. This guy starts to tell a story about how him and his friends used a Ouija board once, and it was boring. After he left and was driving home, and this is where I started to feel all weird, because I knew what he was going to say before he said it, saw the weirdest thing. A black dog walking across the street, but it was walking sideways. So I lose my mind, and I say the things about what I saw and blah blah. No one cared. Okay, that's fine. I think maybe if I had said the thing before he did, it may have been taken more seriously. But I was an obnoxious drunk teenager, so I get it. I thought about it and mentioned it so many times, and I even reached out to the person on multiple occasions, and at least once a year. He was a bit disinterested and kind of blew me off. It's been years since I made any attempt to converse again, but maybe it's time. This was weird, and it's a thing. Does anyone know anything about black dogs walking sideways being an omen of some sort? Has anyone experienced anything similar? Story 21. I think me and my fiancé are haunted. Me and my fiancé have known each other for years, but before we got together again for the second time, she was with someone who knew a witch doctor, and the parent was told she had an entity that stays with her but only to guide her. She has Crohn's disease and is always concerned about any health issue she has, always questioning her death. Between Midaba, she told me she had a dream where she thought it was heaven. She said she was in a room with a blanket she hasn't ever seen before and was told it wasn't her time. She describes the blanket to her family, and it turned out it was her old blanket she loved as an infant. She described the place as peaceful, white walls, and was shining bright. She told me that she didn't want to leave but woke up. I'm not really a believer of these things, but one night in specific, we are sleeping in the same bed, and she woke me up thinking someone broke into the house. Because my living room light next to my room was on, she said that she woke up before it turned on and thought it was me until she saw I was still in bed. There is no way the light was on before we went to sleep, because I'm always, without a doubt, cautious of having lights or anything with electricity to be turned off as to save money on my utilities. The most recent was, I was working, and she's in my bedroom trying to sleep, and here's the master bathroom squeaky open, which it is squeaky but only when closed all the way, and I don't close that door only because I don't ever have reason to. Knowing I have a hard time sleeping for when she doesn't stay over, and I'm in the woods, which makes it even better. I'm by myself no matter what, but I hear things in my house myself. But I used to always pass it off as the house is shifting, but the stomping I hear, I can't deny it, and terrifies the ever-living shit out of me. Story 22. Dad making appearances after death. I posted not too long ago about my dad, and how after his death I had asked for a sign he could still hear me, see me. I felt he answered. I received many responses echoing similar experiences, so I thought I'd share another I found poignant. I had a dream. Two of my sisters were in a big argument at the time, and in the dream I was in my childhood house, watching them bicker back and forth. My dad came and stood next to me and then said, "They're a little nuts, huh?" And I laughed and nodded. Then I woke up. I didn't think much of it until I laughingly told one of the sisters involved, and she kind of froze. She had nearly the same dream the same night, except my dad told her she needed to grow up and be kinder to our sister because the fight wasn't worth it. Again, could be a fluke, and I don't know what's out there, but these experiences make me think things don't end with the end. Story 23. Black dog walking sideways. I don't know if this goes here, But I've been thinking about this since I was 14. I was either 13 or 14, and I was friends with some people that were at least 4 years older than me. We used to drive around at night and go to spooky places for fun. One night, we went to a graveyard that is notorious for being haunted. It was fine, but nothing significant occurred. As we left, we drove for a while down a dirt road that led to the main road. And once we turned onto the main road, a fucking tiny black chihuahua was walking across the middle of the street, but it was walking sideways. So right in our headlights, there's this dog facing us, its eyes glowing and everything, yet it's moving across the road, with both its right leg stepping to the side and then both left legs stepping to the side, like a crab walk. We stopped the car and waited, and it wasn't like just a weird-ass dog. We all felt weird about it. And why was it a chihuahua in such a remote area? So that happened, and was like this weird thing, and we kind of forgot. Years later, I'm 19, and I'm at a party at a friend's house, and this guy is telling a story about this really weird thing that happened to him. He starts to tell about how him and his friends used a Ouija board, and it was kind of boring. Then he starts to say that on his way home, and here is where I lost my shit, because before he said it, I knew what he was going to say. I didn't say it though, because I was like, no, that's stupid, but when he actually said, I saw this dog walking in the middle of the street, but it was walking sideways, I lost my mind. I told him how I knew that's what he was going to say, and I told him my thing, and I was very, very excited. No one else was. I think about it constantly, and how if I would have said what I knew he was about to say, everyone would have taken me more seriously. I can see that it maybe seemed like I was full of shit, because a lot of the time I was, and I was a very drunk and ridiculous teenager, but it's a weird enough thing that if I would have said it before he did, it would be like, really fucking significant. It only ended up being genuinely significant to me though. Years later, I try to connect with him and bring it up and ask about it, and for several years I do the same, and he just kind of blows me off and asks me on a date. That's fine, but no, because I cannot seem to express how motherfucking bizarre this was to anyone. I think I ultimately ended up bothering him, and he stopped responding to me, but it's been a while. I'm 31 now, and maybe it's time to dive back in. I still talk about it and think about it very often, and I'm pretty sure I always will. What was/is this? Eat it. The dog he saw was not a chihuahua. Well, I remember correctly, he described a larger black lab-esque doggo. Story 24. Am I crazy, or are there little goblins or ghosts in my house? Well, this happened to me when I was 10 years old, more or less almost reaching 11, but oh well. I lived with my little brother, who was about 1.5 or 2 years old, something like that. He was still crawling on the floor like a baby. Well, what happened was that one day they left him with me to take care of him. It wasn't just one day. There were several days that I had to take care of him. What happens every time I take care of him? In the afternoons, when I started to cook something for my brother and myself, I felt that someone was watching me, and when I turned around, he was nobody. I clarify that my little brother was a baby attached to me. He didn't like me to be away from him. He was always by my side. Well, as I kept saying, every time I was in the cooking, something told me don't look back. You know that voice in our head that warns us about something? Pay attention to that little voice in my head, and I turned around and my blood froze. There was a small shadow like half my waist to say so, and stood still, and then ran to the hallway and went to my room. I came, grabbed my brother, and went to my room, but there was no one. Then another day passed, and again I felt watched, but again the little voice told me to grab your brother and take him to the kitchen, and when I grabbed my brother, he started to cry, and I saw something behind me, and then it looked at me, and I hugged it, and I told it, there is nothing to worry about, my baby, I will protect you. Then that day I turned around again. When I turned around again, the shadow came out with running, and after that day nothing else happened until today. I still live in the same house. I don't know if my brother felt that spirit, but I felt that whoever saw it or felt it would believe you. Story 25. Did a ghost visit me in my dream? Did I really see her when I woke up? So today I had 2 dreams. Both of them are weird. However, one has made me puzzled more. So the dreams start by me and my family going to a new house, or to someone's house. Not really sure, but it was certainly a house I never visited. We went through a forest in the night to arrive to our destination. Then, it's hazy, but I found myself talking to this girl that only I can see. She told me her name was Sarah. She didn't tell me her age, but she looked no older than 13. She told me she was murdered, and Essa and the criminal was someone her parents know deeply. I was confused to the point where I was like, huh? Is this a dream? Then my mom came, and as I was telling her about this Sarah and what happened to her, a woman who looked like she isn't mentally stable started yelling, telling us that was her daughter. Another thing is I was talking to the girl in English and with my mom in our native language, which was weird who Sarah's mom knew what we were talking about. After that, I woke up. Not fully, but I was conscious of my surroundings, and I was facing towards the wall. And behind me, I felt like someone was behind me, and when I turned around, I saw a shadow going out of the room quickly. What do you think about this? Could it be that Sarah invaded my dream to tell me something? Or what? There were some other details about the dream that I couldn't remember. Person shrugging. Story 26. Has it ever happened to you that someone calls you by your name and when you go to see, there is no one there and you are alone? Okay, let's go back in time. When I was a child, I was 9 years old, and one day a distant aunt looked for me to go to her house. She told me that I was in my country, Venezuela, Valencia. Well, that day that they looked for me, my aunt took me to her house. It was the first time I was in that place. It was a humble place. What could have happened? Everything looked calm. It all started when I went to sleep. Another thing, my aunt had 2 nieces staying at that house too. Well, as I keep saying, that day I slept normally. But what happened when I woke up? I felt like someone was calling my name several times, so I went to see if it was the people in the house, but no. Everyone was asleep. This happened at around 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to be exact. Well, I decided to go to bed again, but the voice wouldn't stop. I mean, I didn't say anything in the sense that I didn't answer, so I went out again, and there was no one there, so that day I went to my grandmother's house and I never returned to my distant aunt's house. What could it be? Tell me. This isn't the only paranormal thing I've experienced. Story 27. My cats hate the thing downstairs. A few years back, I lived in a small house in a real sketchy neighborhood. I mention that because this house was incredibly secured. Bars over the windows, and metal bar screen doors. The experience I'm going to share could easily be written off as an intruder looking around, but in this case, that's just not possible. I have tons of stories about this place, if you guys are interested in hearing more. I believe in the paranormal, but I consider myself skeptical in the sense that I always try and find a logical explanation before assuming anything paranormal is going on. Some of the experiences I've had at this place, including the one I'm telling here, I have zero logical explanation for. Inside the house was me, my roommate, and my 2 cats. My roommate and I were passed out in our rooms, and around 3 in the morning, I heard this absolutely inhuman sound emanating through the house. Cat number 1 was sleeping next to me, and once the noise started, all her hair stood up, and she began to whine. I looked around the house, and cat number 2 wasn't in his normal sleeping spot in the kitchen, and I noticed the basement door was wide open. I checked the locks before going downstairs, and this shriek is still happening every 3 to 5 seconds. Roommate was awake and groggy by this point as well. Once I got downstairs, I saw all of the lights were turned on. There were 4 lights, all of which had light bulb chains that needed to be pulled to turn on. I quickly found the source of the sound. Cat number 2 was shrieking at nothing in the corner. I immediately felt sick and like something was really wrong, and I needed to get the fuck back upstairs. I grabbed my cat, and he lashed out at me and clawed up my arm right up until I got back in the bedroom. And immediately he calmed down and slept until noon the next day. This cat was essentially feral but never bit me or lashed out like he did that night. It was the only time I'd ever seen him genuinely terrified. Despite the fact I was cut up to all hell, I wasn't mad at him. I felt something truly evil down there, and for the rest of the time living there, neither of my cats would so much as look near that door and would whine near the steps anytime my roommate or I would go down there. Story 28. 3 small encounters from my childhood. Hi, I just wanted to share some experiences I had when I was young. I've always been a skeptic, but these encounters I had growing up I can't really explain. Only logical explanation I had was a child's imagination. Anyway, my first encounter happened when I was 6 years old. Our house had burned down and only the lower floor had made it. The upper floor was demolished and covered with tarps. During this time, me, my parents and siblings had to share king-size bed in our living room, with buckets catching water the tarp let through. It was one night in a rainstorm, when we all were sleeping, that I woke up with a jolt and sat straight up. At the foot of the bed I saw what I would describe as a human-shaped white cloud. It stood there for 2 seconds, and then floated down to the doorway and left. I didn't make a sound and hid under the blanket wide awake the whole night. My second encounter happened when I was 10. I was out in our stable doing the usual work, cleaning the stalls and filling them up with new shavings and hay. I were alone in the stable, and I think only my mom was home. Standing by our pile of shavings and shoveling it into my wheelbarrow, I heard a woman's voice saying, "What are you doing here?" It sounded like as if someone was standing right behind me. I swung around and didn't see anyone. This terrified me so much that I dropped everything and ran out of the stable and into my house. My mom had to go with me back to the stable because I was too afraid to go back alone. My third encounter happened when I was 14. We had a 12-year-old horse that we had from when he was born. He had to be put down. A tumor had grown in his cheek, and it had taken over a large part of his jaw. We cremated him and had his ashes put into the soil of a rose bush in our yard. A couple of days after this, I was in our stable working. I was alone, and all the other horses were outside in their paddocks. I was sweeping the stable passage when I heard a hooves walking inside the stable on the other side, from the part one was in. I ran towards the noise since I thought a horse must have broken the fence and got loose, but it was empty. I ran outside and all the horses were where they were supposed to be. I remember walking back to the stable and just crying, thinking that it must have been him. We moved away a couple years later, and I've never had any experience close to these before. Story 29. Some of my experiences with the other side. I have many of them to tell. Story 1. As a Brazilian, I grew up in a country where African-rooted religions are common as well. These religions often deal directly with the spiritual world, spirits, entities, and everything in between. Because of my exposure to these beliefs and practices, I've become somewhat accustomed to these kinds of experiences. While they can be unsettling, I usually know how to handle myself in such situations. However, on this particular night, I encountered something that truly terrified me. It was late at night, and I was walking home from the gym alone. I was in a bad place in life, emotionally and mentally, and I had my headphones on, listening to music. The song playing was Slow Chemical. I remember this detail vividly, because even now, that song brings me back to that night. As I approached the cemetery near my house, I started to feel like I was being followed. At first I brushed it off, thinking it was just paranoia or the usual fear of being mugged. But the closer I got to the cemetery, the more certain I became that I wasn't alone. It was an overwhelming feeling, as if something heavy was pressing down on me. When I reached the street directly in front of the cemetery gates, my whole body went into survival mode. It was like my instincts knew I was in danger. The sensation of being followed turned into something far worse. It wasn't a subtle following anymore. Whatever it was felt like it was running toward me, getting closer. The pressure was suffocating. In sheer panic, I started running. I wasn't far from home, but in hindsight, running was a terrible idea. Whatever was following me knew that I knew it was there, and it began chasing me with even more intensity. I was praying desperately as I ran, hoping to encounter another person on the street. Anything to break this overwhelming terror. When I finally got home, I immediately lit candles and prayed for whatever it was to leave me alone. That's when I realized it was a female spirit, a disembodied soul that had followed me. I have no idea what she wanted from me, but the pressure she exerted on me was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Story 2. Because of the religious influences I grew up with, experiences with spirits became somewhat routine for me. One day, I was talking with a friend about protective guides. Think of them as guardian angels. My friend said he felt a strong connection to his guide and shared some personal experiences. I cautioned him to be careful. Sometimes, malevolent spirits pretend to be benevolent to drain your energy. The moment I said that, I regretted it. Immediately, the light bulb in my room exploded. I got up to go into my room, but when I reached the door, I froze. I couldn't step inside. My body was paralyzed, gripped by fear. It was as if my survival instincts were screaming at me to stay out. But I couldn't do it. I stood there, panicked and unable to enter my own room. Eventually, I lit candles and prayed, asking whatever presence was there to leave. The atmosphere became icy cold, and my room felt even colder than the rest of the house. I had chills, fear, and an overwhelming sense of dread. For a while after that, I couldn't bring myself to enter my room. Final thoughts. My advice? Don't underestimate them. Don't challenge or provoke them. Always ask respectfully to be left in peace.